Many of you might be familiar with the phrase, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." It's often falsely attributed to William Shakespeare. In fact, it comes from a play that was written in 1697, about 100 years later, by a guy named William Congreve. And the full line goes like this: "Heaven has no rage like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned." And today I want to break down that notion, that concept of the scornful woman, the vengeful woman who, whereupon facing rejection or indeed other circumstances, lashes out in vengeance and anger in a way that could only be described as self-righteous and in the eyes of the many very much unjustified. So contained within that phrase, whether it's in the original or the modified quote, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," the idea being that if you reject a woman in any capacity, she will visit her wrath upon you. Now, this is most commonly made manifest in the very simple rejection of a woman's advances or her interest in you, because there are a number of factors that go into this, obviously. There's a long-standing biological order, of course, that demands that the man is the one who approaches. And indeed, it is the woman who ultimately selects as to whether or not the man is appropriate for her. And womenkind have done this since time immemorial. So part of that is an emergent social order or social system that is ultimately derived from biological functions. So women are simply just not frequently in the position that they act as suitors, and therefore when they do have interest and they're more active about it, when they're rejected, it's taken that much more seriously. But it doesn't even need to be about being a suitor. It can simply be as simple as a scenario such as a man and a woman going on several dates where she fancies him and he determines at the end of the series of dates that he doesn't fancy her terribly much or doesn't like her as much as she likes him. Now, this social order, ultimately derived from certain biological realities that go back millions and millions of years, leads to a situation where, of course, men are used to quote-unquote rejection and have to deal with it in good faith without any sort of negativity, but women are not. And again, whether or not it's a woman outright approaching a man or simply a determination after several dates that the man doesn't like her, this generally leads to an asymmetry in the reaction on the part of a man versus the part of a woman. Man is rejected, whether through direct approach or after several dates. He has to chalk it up to bad luck or whatever and move on. A woman's rejected, and not universally the case, but very frequently, you get this idea of "hell hath no fury as a woman scorned." I've seen, by dint of the presence of social media, all the bizarre tactics and things that women engage in when they receive rejection. Trying to get back at the guy, making up stories, and sometimes the worst case scenario is accusing him of rape or sexual assault. All of it being poppycock in the instances I've cited. All because these particular women were so possessed of an ego that was so massive and entitled that they could not tolerate a single instance of what they deemed as inappropriate. Because beyond the logical derivation of why women might act this way, given the biological asymmetries that exist between men and women, it's really worth thinking about the degree of this expression of fury. The idea that a woman's value is so great and so intrinsic that any rejection of something she's offering is fundamentally wrong and indeed ought to be punished. Now, you might recall in a recent video I talked about female perception. And perception doesn't often, in this case, accord with reality. This idea of the cheaper to keep everything marriage, which is arguably an emergent phenomenon in the last couple of decades, where women want to keep the entirety of the marriage, but at the same time want something special on the side. So they're getting all the goodies in the formal institution that they would otherwise not have but they get to have a little bit of fun, excitement, just for them. And this is then subsequently justified as necessary because the husband isn't providing it, or the marriage isn't providing it, and by golly, she demands it, and because she demands it, and because she's so deserving of it, she should get it, shouldn't she? Never mind a legal contract, never mind the ethics behind it. She wants it, so she should get it. And this is the same operative principle as hell hath no fury as a woman scorned. Quite simply, women think they're incredibly valuable, and that their time is incredibly valuable, and that their existence is more valuable than virtually anything else. And this goes well beyond formal rejection, where the consequences can be pretty dire. Some of these stories I've relayed to you are real. They're not common, but they do happen. It can go to a complete misperception of reality after years have passed. So one common thing you'll hear all the time, in fact, when you encounter men who've been broken in the context of marriage, or have heard stories about such men, is that you'll hear about this sudden turning on the part of the wife. Everything was okay, but then she turned vicious, and she wanted a divorce. And starting at that point of time of separation, or indeed outwardly expressed discontent, she starts behaving very differently. She's petty, she's vengeful, she resents him. Resentment's probably the biggest one. And you'll see why this is the case expressed in various statements. You've often heard, of course, the phrase, "I gave him the best years of my life." This idea that a woman's time is uniquely precious, far more so than the time of a man, is an extension of this ego and self-appraisal of incredible value. And so when you see this manifestation of women whose behavior radically shifts, leading to a breakup, or in the wake of a divorce or the end of a relationship, what's often happening is the woman has calculated in her own mind that the man has committed a wrong against her, that he had been wasting her time. 6 or 7 year relationship down the drain because the man did not turn out to be the spitting image of what the woman desired and thought he was, and I will talk about this briefly in a bit. Well, it's his fault, and he deserves to suffer. He bamboozled her. He tricked her. How dare he? Now remember, I've said this several times in previous videos, I think the metaphor we want to look at here is how women view men when they first encounter them in a positive light or are fond of them. It's like an impeccable painting. There are no cracks, no fissures. It is more or less perfect. And as time goes by, the man being a mere human being, something we all are, cracks and fissures emerge. And the woman can't help but take note of these cracks and fissures. The mistake she makes is not that her own perception has been incorrect and that she's simply projecting something onto the man, and as a consequence inevitably leading to a severe sense of disappointment. The mistake she makes is not the acknowledgement of that. The mistake she makes is that she believed her vision to be true. The picture was perfect, and the man, of course, has ruined it for her. And he needs to pay the piper, especially when so much time has gone by. Imagine, say, in the context of a marriage, all those years gone by, children. But it turned out that he wasn't as perfect as she had envisioned him to be, or the marriage itself wasn't as perfect as she had envisioned it to be, or both, or her life. Well, someone needs to pay the price, and of course it's not her fault. I mean, it takes two to tango is a pretty alien concept here. So ultimately, it has to be his fault. And then we see this reemergence of hell hath no fury as a woman scorned. This unrighteous anger directed at what is usually a fairly innocent guy here. A guy with his foibles, a guy who's done his best, but a guy who is oblivious to all the internal psychology going off in her own mind. The tall tales that women spin in their own minds could probably take up thousands of pages in a novel. But he's not privy to that. And then boom. He's supposed to just know these things. He's supposed to perceive it all. Now, this is just a function of female psychology, but ultimately, the real danger here is the anger and the unrighteous directing of that anger towards the man. Rather than viewing human male-female relationships as fundamentally and basically dysfunctional in some sense, which is to say, you can get by in them, but they'll never be perfect, and they will never, ever approach that near-perfect vision that so many women concoct in their own heads. She thinks that he has betrayed that vision. He's slashed the painting, that perfect painting that she had painted in her own mind, and she needs to go after him for it. And I don't think there's any curing of this. I don't think there's any way to fix this idea, since it's all based on projection. Because the more the man tries to, quote-unquote, be himself, the more he tries to reveal his actual humanity, with both its good points and its flaws, the more she feels betrayed by that. There's no way out of that, ultimately. And I've seen this happen time and time again, in relationships, in marriages. I've talked to guys who are simply blindsided by this. One day, they wake up to an angry, vengeful, bitter wife or girlfriend, and they know not what has transpired, but she's going to pay them back for all her suffering, all those years down the drain, because he wasn't perfect. He didn't live up to her expectations. And of course, her being the center of the universe, or at least her universe, he needs to pay. Anyway, gentlemen, if I'm still live, I'll check you out later. As always, may the gods watch over you, and you enjoy your forthcoming weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.